Good evening. Let's try that again. We are in the South. Good evening.
Good evening.
Awesome. It is my great pleasure. We really, truly have a who's who of the environmental movement in the room tonight, as well as some fabulous students and colleagues from Agnes Scott. We are just thrilled. I am personally thrilled to welcome all of you to this very special evening with Professor David Orr. If you don't know me, I'm Elizabeth Quiche. I have the great good fortune of being president of Agnes Scott College, and it's my joy to also welcome you to this gold certified building and the Franny Griggs auditorium. We are in a geothermal. This building has a geothermal HVAC system. I always need to say that for actually all events, not just sustainability events. But we are absolutely delighted and really honored to welcome back to our campus a pioneering environmental activist, a distinguished environmental scholar, a visionary, and a public intellectual, whom we are proud to claim. We know that many institutions like to claim David Orr, but we like to claim him as being one of our own, Professor David Orr. He taught at Agnes Scott in the 1970s, and while he's been gone quite a few years, his influence lives on in powerful ways. He was a transformative professor here who inspired a number of his students to embrace the cause of environmental sustainability as their life's work, and I really want to single out among that group of students our fabulous Susan Kidd, sitting back here. Susan is truly, she's the executive director of our Center for Sustainability. She has done so much here at Agnes Scott over the past decade, and I'm so thrilled to call myself her co-conspirator. And she was very much inspired by Professor David Orr. But his influence went beyond our campus as well while he was here at Agnes Scott. He organized several conferences here in Atlanta on major, and especially if you think about this, this is in the 1970s, really cutting edge topics, bringing nationally recognized speakers and convening people from across the city. At one of these, the Limits to Growth, I do know that a young engineering student from Emory had his life changed and completely ended up rethinking his career plans, and that is Dennis Creech, who will be familiar to many of you here as another visionary. And I could go on and on, because there are other people here who are doing extraordinary work in environmental sustainability, and I suspect that your stories also connect to David Orr. So after leaving Agnes Scott, he taught at UNC Chapel Hill, and then spent 11 years, and he was meeting with some first-year students earlier today, and he said, you know, at some point in your life, you need to jump off a cliff. And I suspect that his wonderful wife, Elaine, will describe this as a cliff jump, where he left a tenured position at UNC Chapel Hill and spent 11 years creating and running a pioneering sustainable farm and forestry project. It was a farm, a sawmill, a conference center. He raised organic cattle and blueberries, and also, because this is David Orr, convened thought leaders from around the world, brought them to Arkansas, banking and climate science, all kinds of really interesting convenings. Then in the late 1980s, I guess he was lured, 1989, thereabouts, he was lured back to academia, to Oberlin College, where he joined the faculty, and he is now the Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Special Assistant to the President of Oberlin. Over his 2 decades or so at Oberlin, he has not only shaped in very important ways the public intellectual, the public discourse around climate change and sustainability, he's also helped to turn Oberlin into a national powerhouse for sustainability. So among the many things that he's done, he's organized the construction of one of the greenest buildings in North America, the Adam Joseph Lewis Center for Environmental Studies at Oberlin College, a building which was named by the U.S. Department of Energy as one of the 30 milestone buildings of the 20th century. No small feat. But that's not all he did. He also published 9 books, including Ecological Literacy, The Nature of Design, Down to the Wire, and his new book, Dangerous Years, Climate Change, the Long Emergency, and the Way Forward, which will be for sale in the foyer just outside the framing. He also founded a journal, Solutions, and the Oberlin Project, an innovative joint venture between this Oberlin College and the city of Oberlin to create a sustainable city across all modes there, from solar power to eco startups, a true model of that kind of college, town, college city partnership, which is really paving the way for colleges and universities all across the country. And in an influential article in the Chronicle of Higher Education in 2000, he proposed the goal of carbon neutrality for colleges and universities, which has really spawned a national movement now with over 600 colleges and universities signed on to that what's now called the Climate Leadership Network. And I'm proud to say that Agnes Scott is one of them, and that we are a third of the way towards our goal of climate neutrality by 2037. So clearly somebody who is an extraordinary change agent and a visionary. And the last thing I want to say about what makes David's work so distinctive is that he's the product of a liberal arts college, Westminster College in Pennsylvania. He has taught at Agnes Scott and then at Oberlin, and he really embodies the ways in which teacher scholars at liberal arts institutions and students who are the graduates of liberal arts institutions can draw on multiple disciplines to frame problems and to understand what ways of being and what forms of action, what kinds of knowledge you need to mobilize in order to address those problems. And I really see him, here at Agnes Scott, we're trying to inspire our students to think about leadership grounded in the liberal arts and to figure out ways in which they can make a difference. And I think David is a truly spectacular example of that. So for that, as for all the other reasons I've mentioned, we are delighted to welcome you here. I want to thank Susan Kidd and her incredible army of sustainability students and fellows, Elizabeth Rowe, Emma Dufresne, Bryn Bassett, and others who've been involved with organizing this event and this day. I also want to thank and acknowledge the support of the Mel Chamley Howard Fund for sustainability here at Agnes Scott. I'm delighted that Mel's daughter, Lucia, is here with her husband, Tom. So thank you for your support of sustainability at Agnes Scott. And finally, I just want to say, again, we're going to be, of course, doing questions and answers after Professor Orr's presentation. But his book is on sale, and I think he is going to be willing to sign books as well. And I know that at least one of you brought one of his books from the 80s, completely covered with Post-it notes. So I know you want to add to your David Orr collection. So there it is. There you go. There couldn't be a more important moment, I believe, for us to gather as a community committed to sustainability and committed to global thinking about how we tackle the challenges facing humanity. And so at this truly turbulent time in American history and in global history, I am honored to have Professor Orr talk to us about how the dangerous years just got more dangerous, climate policy and the Trump presidency, and what we can do about it. Please join me in welcoming.
As Elizabeth was going through my resume, and thank you for that. That was a wonderful introduction. Half of it's true. I reached into my pocket to pull out my notes, and I found so I'm inclined to take these things. I recollected silverware. So I want to give the fork back. Susan Kidd, Susan, where
Hello, I'm here. I'm here, Professor Orr.
Is a great host. You know, Susan, thank you for your leadership and friendship.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking care of it so well. And I'm very proud of you as a student and a leader in this field. And yeah, I'll give you the grade. I'll change the grade. So
Took a
I need
while.
form from the registrar. It's really nice to be back here. I feel like a crowd of friends. You know, look around the room. There's so many of you. Dennis Creech and I had dinner last night. Steve Nygren is here. Jim Hartsville is here. And so many of you here I know and know well of. And have been colleagues with through the years in a variety of ways. And then the faculty here, the best decision I ever made as a faculty member while I was here was to hire Gus Cochran in the political science department. Gus had an analytical mind, and I was not trying to be analytical, more combative and militant. And Gus balanced that very well. And then Bob Leslie and I did a couple of conferences together. Bob's been a dear friend for lots of years, and we traveled together. Bob and I did organize the conferences on limits to growth in 1973 and one on land use in 1974. The one on limits to growth, if you look at the map, and I actually have it on the slide deck here, if you look at the map of Atlanta, where Bob and I organized the conference on limits to growth. Atlanta was pretty small by comparison, and now it's, of course, pretty big. 8 or 9 years ago, I had dinner with Jimmy Carter, and he was a co-sponsor, the speaker at that event. And he had a very wry sense of humor, as you know, if you know him, and I know well, but he was looking straight down at his plate, and he referenced the conferences on limits to growth. He said, "You remember those?" And I said, "Oh, yes, sir, I do." Long pause, never looked up from his plate. He said, "Well, it's a good thing you guys did that, because if you hadn't, Atlanta would have really sprawled." Never smiled, never looked up from his plate. Steady focus on mashed potatoes. So but I want to come back to that theme in just a minute. In 1971, when I came here, I had 2 job offers. It was a tight job market in political science, and I hadn't quite finished my degree yet. It was a tight market in political science, but I had one really good offer from the CIA, and it was to be an agent in the CIA. And I've thought about that often. If I had taken that job, the life would have been very, very different. When I took the job at Agnes Scott, where I was an agent of a different sort. And not nearly so much secret, but that was a very different world. And I want to come back to that tonight, because that was a world 3 years after the adoption of the Southern Strategy, which revolutionized and changed American politics in lots and lots of ways. In 1970, the EPA was formed, now under assault and threat and being threatened with abolition. 1970 was the Clean Air Act. 1972, the Clean Water Act. And that was a whole different, and those were passed. Those landmark bills were passed by Republicans and Democrats under a Republican president. That was a different world. 1974, the Wilderness Act, and I remember Bob Kerr and other people led the fight on the Wilderness Act here, and the Danahelo Wilderness here in the North Georgia forest. That was a world of possibilities. And that was a world when Republicans and Democrats did come together. They had differences about how things might be done in some ways, but that was a world in which we acted as a nation and responded to the evidence at hand. And the limits to growth for its limits as a study, which I think were fewer than many people thought about. I mean, it still reads quite well. In essence, the story is very simple. It's infinite growth can't continue infinite, not on a finite planet. And all the intellectual capital that was accumulated in those years, it was considerable. We never really solved the issue of growth. It came up today in conversations around the campus. It's still there. We're now 7.4 billion. At that time, we were probably 4 or 4.5 billion people, but now 7.4. The UN upper projection is around 11 billion by the end of the century. Consumption, there's more stuff moving faster around the earth than ever before. The consumer economy is alive and well and wreaking havoc on the planet. Oceans are acidified. And you know the aided awful stuff. And it's gotten worse since the 1970s. in 1976, was still here in town, splitting your time between here and Chapel Hill, and working as a small cog in Jimmy Carter's transition team on the energy committee. And Carter would come into the office one day and ask for a document on the biggest environmental issues the administration would face. And so several of us were assigned to work on that. And we assembled a team that included Avery Levins, who had just published in October the Foreign Affairs piece, still the most read piece in Foreign Affairs history, The Road Less Traveled. Herman Daly, Gene Odom. We put an all-star cast together, went to a lodge in Portugal called Wolf Creek, literally locked the door and stayed there at Wolf Creek until we had drafted this statement. That was 1976. That document still reads well. We still do not have a de jure climate policy or an energy policy that is coherent and calibrated to the way the Earth works as a physical system. And that was 1976. And now we're going backwards on those issues. We're now run by an administration that is full of climate deniers, even though the evidence has gotten more and more. I'm going to talk briefly about it.
David,
So,
could you use the mic, please?
uh,
I want to hear you.
do I need to repeat all this? All right, yes. And that is one. Is that better? I asked my host if this also filtered out stupid and inane comments. And the answer was no, buddy, you're on your own. So I'll try to be careful. But a good bit has happened. That was the early 1970s. And a good bit has happened. And I want to put a plug for the liberal arts. The 5 years that Elaine and I spent here were in many ways the best years of our lives, certainly intellectually. And the liberal arts institutions like Agnes Scott and Oberlin, but only about 2 to 3% of college graduates come out of liberal arts institutions. And I see that issue as linked to the human future in so many ways. We need liberally educated people who can think broadly and see the big picture of climate change is certainly only one part of it, but issues of inequity and war and peace. And so the liberal arts to me are critically important. We need technicians for sure, but we need liberally educated technicians. So I'm going to put in a plug for the liberal arts and thank all of you who make this place a very special place. All of you who fund it and give money and work here and teach here, and certainly Elizabeth's leadership has been really quite stellar. This is an amazing transformation. A good many of the buildings that I knew, including this one, back in the early 70s, have been transformed in so many ways. So here's what I want to do. I want to leave enough time for Q&A because I think this is a time for dialogue. We need to talk some things through. But I want to talk about climate change. It's not that you don't know the issues. You certainly know them as well as I do or better. I want to talk about our response to that at Oberlin. I want to talk a little bit about the Oberlin project, and then I want to talk about some politics. And this is a time where I think these issues are joined at the hip. They are linked. Our capacity to run a coherent, robust, real democracy and our capacity to respond to these big issues like climate change and war and peace, I think is linked. So I want to join these issues together and leave enough time to chat. This is one curve, and this is a curve you all know, all of you that are in the building business and energy business, and certainly all of you in business, know that the cost curve of renewable energy has been falling dramatically. And with that, lots of other curves. So the cost of battery storage and power, for example, has been falling dramatically, and all those related R&D curves. That is a true curve. And then there's this one. And this is also true. This is, of course, the Keeling curve. You're looking at that sawtooth accumulation, that annual sawtooth accumulation of carbon in the atmosphere. And when David Keeling went to Mauna Loa in 1958, the level of carbon down here was around 315 parts per million. As of 2 days ago, we were at 406 parts per million. That number will fluctuate a little bit, but there's nobody in the room, and certainly no student in the room, who will ever live in a world again where the carbon is below 400 parts per million. We passed that. And so these are the two curves. These are the bookends of the rational debate about the human future. They affect lots of other things. This curve also is related to other curves. So ocean acidification, species extinction, soil loss, forest loss, and so forth. And so the problem we have in organizing a coherent national debate is how do we reconcile two curves, both of which are true? And we have to make a decision which is more fundamental. And it's pretty clear from the science that the Keeling curve is the more fundamental curve. And it is this remorseless working at big numbers. We've been adding carbon to the atmosphere for a long time. And all of you that follow this debate know that you can extend this curve back. The ice core record goes back around 800,000 years. You can, if you change the standards for evidence, you can go back another maybe 10 million years or so. And then you saw the news in the paper, and I'm going to, the New York Times today, I'm going to come back to that in just a second. This is the New York Times coverage of the announcement that this was the hottest year on record, or last year was the hottest year on record. And so there is an accumulation of anecdotal and scientific evidence. We didn't have that in the 1970s. No one was really at that point talking about climate change as a serious thing. To the extent it was discussed, it was around a book Stephen Schneider had written on global cooling. And as we have learned more about how the Earth works as a physical system, it's clear that, in fact, the Earth wasn't cooling. There are ups and downs and so forth, but there was a steady trend upwards of carbon in the atmosphere. This is what the accumulation looks like. This is a graphic taken from the Washington Post several months ago. And it's compelling in what it shows you, the inertial momentum of those numbers. And so that's where we were in 2014, or ended up. And so you see us going from a background level, pre-industrial level, maybe 260, 70, or 80 parts per million, or a high of 290 parts per million, to something now that's 406 parts per million, and this relentless momentum of carbon in the atmosphere from the combustion of fossil fuels, from the mismanagement of the soils and forests and grasslands and so forth. And CO2, and there's lots of subtleties here or nuances. CO2 is only one of 6 or 7 other heat-trapping gases, some of which trap heat much more effectively than carbon dioxide. So think of this as a series of windows. We're gradually closing windows. So the Earth takes in high-energy radiation, but then doesn't release low-energy radiation or heat back to the atmosphere. So to a Republican group several weeks ago, somebody didn't understand the issue, and I said, well, envision yourself being in a car in a parking lot in Houston on a July day, and you roll up the windows. The ambient temperature outside may be 95 degrees, but the inside of the car taking in that high energy radiation will rise to 150 or 160 degrees. So that's what we're in effect doing to the Earth. This is the second graphic, and this is simply the global temperature change. When 8 years ago, as in a group, John Holdren, President Obama's science advisor, was part of the group, and I turned to John and I said, what happens after a 2 degrees centigrade warming? That's that outer red line here. And John, very emotional, he studied climate and energy issues for a long time, and he was very emotional. He said, you don't really want to go there. And so we didn't. But the assumption was that if 2 degree centigrade was a guardrail, that would keep us within some sort of safe balance. Turns out that's not nearly good enough. And so at COP21, the guardrail was then, or what was thought to be the safe limit, was reduced to 1.5 degrees centigrade. So you see where this ends up. We're somewhere between 1.1 degrees centigrade and 1.2 degrees centigrade right now, and there's no sign that that's going to slow down anytime soon. And so the relationship of the accumulation of heat-trapping gases and actual temperature is a pretty straightforward relationship. This is our margin of safety. Again, is calculated or portrayed by the Washington Post. And so this is the amount of carbon that we can burn and stay below that 1.5 degrees centigrade guardrail. And this, again, is not good news. It's the inertial momentum of this vast civilization. This is why these decisions being made to take power plants offline and not to invest in new carbon-based infrastructure is so critically important. Once the infrastructure's there, you've got to recoup your money and you're going to burn whatever it is you're going to burn. That's why pipelines and power plants and so forth that rely on fossil fuels, these decisions are decisions that will make or break the human future. We like to assume, and this gets into issues, partly of semantics, partly of culture, but we like to assume that we can solve climate change. In fact, I was part of a group that started a journal along with Paul Hawken and Bob Costanza and John Todd that started a journal called Solutions. And I objected to the title because I said the word solutions here has to be taken with a lot of skepticism. If you have a broken carburetor on a pickup truck, that's a solvable problem. And Americans are really good at solving technological problems. Carbon in the atmosphere is not quite the same thing. Carbon in the atmosphere, we'll be lucky to remove carbon in the atmosphere at a volume we need, at a pace necessary to forestall some pretty bad outcomes at a price we are willing to pay. And so once carbon is in the atmosphere, it tends to stay there a long time. It'll take a heroic effort. And thank goodness there are lots of people, Paul Hawken among them, and Klaus Lackner, that are working on this front to try to stop or to pull carbon out of the atmosphere. But it's an uphill fight, and God bless them for their courage and initiative in innovation. We have to try everything right now. This is Tom Toll's version of this, but we love to think of technological solutions to everything. So whatever ails us, there's some gadget that will fix it, and that's just not the way the world works. Like this also is kind of the thinking that we need in the liberal arts education department. So what Tolles is proposing to invent here is a time machine that takes us backwards, which is, I love this guy. If you saw the New York Times this morning, you saw the Larsen C ice shelf made the front page, at least of the electronic version. And this is that ice shelf. Now the crack is running about 100 miles. It is 20 miles from the sea, and so the report indicates that scientists expect this to break off within the next month or two, or even perhaps sooner. So this is an ice shelf, which means it's just a glacier hanging out over ocean water, and as ocean temperatures go up, as they have been going up, it melts from underneath, and then all kinds of other physical pressures happen, but this is about to be headline news. This, of course, is what we all know. Last year was the hottest year on record. I won't dwell on that, but that's where we're headed. The problem we have in thinking about this, and one of the points of the book Dangerous Years, is to say that carbon, since it does stay in the atmosphere a long time, this isn't like you're packing for a trip to the beach over a weekend. This is more like packing for a trip over the Himalayas. So this is going to be a centuries to perhaps millennia long journey through this dangerous year period. And there is no known technological device that's going to save us, not in the time that we've got available and not in the volume and the scale of the problem. We've been digging a very deep hole for a long time. And so our typical response, and you've heard this as much as I have, is, oh, that's so depressing. Well, you're damn right, it is depressing. Some of you know a friend of mine, Puck Mickleby, and Puck and I were giving a presentation. He's a Marine Corps colonel. We were giving a presentation, and Puck went through some of the logistics of climate change, and somebody in the audience said, well, that really is depressing, and Puck said, you're damn right. Then he gave a briefing on how Marines handle depressing news. You're going into combat, you're going to die, get over it. Go do your duty. And that's a little bit of the mentality we're going to have here. It's going to take some courage to get through this. But the physics and chemistry of this issue are not, they're daunting. They are daunting. That's not to say there's no hope. To the contrary. All of us are in the room because we do have hope. But hope isn't the same as optimism. Optimism means you know you're going to win the game. That's like being an Atlanta Falcon fan in the third quarter. Boy, that's a bad dig, isn't it? All right, scratch that for record. Reverse that film. But the only logical position, somewhere between despair and optimism, is to be hopeful. I want to end with that theme. Before Ray Anderson passed away, he gave me several of his books, and this was a quote taken from one of those books. The issue is a systems crisis, and that means we have to think broadly about how to solve that crisis. And Karl Heinrich Baer, of course, was the founder of Natural Step, and I love this quote. I want to go to, now what do we do about it? And all of us, I think, feel a bit frustrated because the solutions are not available at the top of the system. In the 1970s, when I first came to Agnes Scott in Atlanta, that was a time when mostly the federal government, but some states were leading on how to deal with these issues. And so legislation was passed. And we had all kinds of things at the federal level. Those days, or at least for the time being, those days are gone. And what you find now across the country is a huge amount of creativity and the transition town movement in Britain and across much of Europe. But virtually everywhere you go, and all of you had this experience, what you do at Serenbe and what's happening with South Face and other organizations, there's a lot of creativity and people are doing lots of things across a whole range of issues. So at the bottom of the society, there is a huge amount of movement that is creative. It's food systems, sustainable agriculture, it's building, it's equity issues, it's community making. And so if there's reason for hope, it's at the grassroots. This is what we're doing at Oberlin. And President Keach mentioned the Oberlin project. We started this in 2009, created an office in 2010. We conceived of what we were doing as temporary and catalytic but not permanent. And our idea was to create a partnership with the city, the college, and the community around the goals you see on the screen behind you. Can we get to carbon neutrality? Can we create a viable local economy and make it a sustainable economy? Could we grow, say, up to 70% of our food from local sources, say local within a 20-mile radius of this little town? Could we build an educational platform that puts sustainability and all that's entailed in that big confusing word into the local schools? Could we start a larger community-wide dialogue about sustainability? And so this was where we started. And it was a temporary partnership between the city, the college, and the local community, the churches, and all the civic organization within the community. This is our town, and we're 14 miles from Lake Erie, a little town of about 9,000. We are dead center Rust Belt. Detroit, if you draw a straight line from Oberlin to Detroit, it's about 84 miles. Cleveland's 35 miles to our east. Youngstown, another 60 miles to our east. Toledo, Ohio, we're Rust Belt. And so wherever the gravity mass of the Rust Belt economy is going, that's where we're going to go unless we understand how to begin to build a different kind of economy. The first time I showed this picture 4 or 5 years ago, I said that this picture was taken by a first-year student at Oberlin who we equipped with a camera, electronic download, and attached him to a helium-filled balloon. And I said, just being a kind of a wise guy, I said, you know, we miss him a lot. It was Bob. He was a nice kid. He didn't transfer, he just kind of drifted away. We've lost contact with him. So for the record, Bob was not connected to it. He transferred anyway for different reasons. This is a very typical Ohio town. Lots of activity organized around a town square. You'll see a wee bit more of that. But this is where we are. This is our town in capsule summary. We were formed in 1832. Oberlin was the first college to accept African Americans and women and graduate them. That's been part of our DNA ever since the founding. We're a city of just a little bit less than 10,000. We're right, the poverty level fluctuates from 21 to 28%. So we're Rust Belt and we're poor in that sense. 52% of the kids in the schools are on free and reduced lunch. The first thing that we did before the founding of the Oberlin Project was this is the building, many of you have seen these pictures before, but this is the Adam Joseph Lewis Center. This building was designed by a group of 250 students working with an incredible design team that included the McDonough Group and people from NASA and Amory Lovins and Carol Franklin and lots of other people. And the goal of this was to create a model of a green building starting from where we were in the early 1990s. Many of you in the room, and Dennis certainly have taken this on much farther. But this was the first cut. And this building is still entirely solar powered. This past year we generated an electric surplus from 2 photovoltaic arrays on site, about 37%. It is built and processes all its own wastewater on site using a John Todd designed living machine, so it's basically an indoor wetland. The building is in its, we opened in 2000, the building is in its 17th year. But buildings are just buildings. The thing I'm most proud of in this case is the effect the building had on the students that worked on the making of the building. This is a project they participated in, and the hardest thing, frankly, to overcome was not the making of the building, it was to overcome their disbelief that we could ever do anything. And they thought this was all kind of theoretical, but no, we did it. We pulled it off, and it became a model for what we did next. The landscape around the building is part of the overall design. So it is a building with an 1.25 acre landscape around it. The front of the building is a solar plaza that reflects light into the building. On the south side, the east side of the structure is a replicated or renewed, a kind of a restored small snapshot of what this area wants to be. It wants to be a wetland, so that's all wetland and wetland plants. The back of the building on the north side is a working landscape, and students maintain all this. So the building functioned for us as a laboratory. So they were involved in the design of the building, the making of the programs, and also the operation of the building. Interior shot, this is one of the 2 photovoltaic arrays. That is Sherrod Brown, and Republicans have already assembled reportedly $40 million to unseat him out of his Senate seat next year. So this is a fundraising appeal for send money to Ohio for Sherrod Brown. This is what we did with the community. We organized the community around a series of teams of food and education and economic development and so forth. And the big challenge for us is to begin to move sustainability into the economic arena so that we create jobs. When battles come up within the city council, the issue is going to be whether people actually earn a paycheck from some sort of sustainable enterprise. And so one of the big challenges this year is to set up a food hub that's the connector between the local farm community and the local food buyers within the community. So these are challenges to make sustainability something that really works economically. But these were some of the teams we organized. And this goes against a good bit of the way we've organized the world around silos. Our goal was to begin to look at these things as parts of the system that reinforce each other. And that's something that's a lot easier said than done. One of the great experiments that we've rolled into as part of the Oberlin project is the work of Josh, Naomi, and Ben. This is the New York Times story, and they started a development company, did a project on the south side of the Green Arts District. You'll see that in just a moment. But this is what they did. They built 3 buildings. A business incubator is behind them, but 33 condominiums, business spaces on the ground floor. But this anchored part of the larger development, 106 million total. This was about 17 million of it. And so this project showed that we could rebuild the downtown and stop the urban sprawl. So the heart of the effort for us was to take a downtown that was pretty bereft and needed a lot of help, and begin to rebuild the downtown to develop our own version of the new urbanism. This is the groundbreaking for, and then we wanted to take all this solar stuff and show that in fact it worked for people who were poor. So this is the groundbreaking for a solar house. The mother's there, it was a single mom below the poverty line with 2 kids. This is the back of the house. It's a little boxy, but it's 1,400 square feet, a little bit over 1,400 square feet. Solar powered, walls are R40, ceiling R60. It's built just a little bit south of the German passive house standard. But the goal now, we're hoping to start planning for a 14-acre development of similar kind of housing at the affordable level, but make it entirely solar powered, 0 discharge, and begin to show that green design works not just for the wealthy and the privileged, but also works for people who need some help. This is a large solar array we put in. It's an 11-acre array. It's a tracking array. And so this is rated at 2.27 megawatts. It turns out a little bit over 3 megawatts of power because it does follow the sun. And by comparison, in Oberlin, our baseload power needs are 11 megawatts. And we peak at about 22 to 23 megawatts. This is the Green Arts District. And this, for a reference point, this is Tappan Square. If you know anything about Oberlin, this is Tappan Square. 13 acres. This is also 13 acres. When the people, the settlers came east out of Connecticut into this part of Ohio, they carved up everything in squares. And some would say they also squared off the mindset, but that's a different issue. We designated this as a Green Arts District. Again, this is part of downtown renewal in a little city in the heart of the U.S. Rust Belt, and a city with a poverty level in the low to high 20s. So this is one of the great art museums in higher education. This is the Allen Art Museum. It was built in 1917. It was one of the first things we did was to rehab this to the gold standard. And for an art museum, this is one of the famous art museums in higher education, ranks behind Harvard and Yale and Williams College, and there's Oberlin. So that's a pretty tough assignment. That was done. This is a performing arts center that will be scheduled for a $30 million upgrade, and a new theater is part of this. And then this is the old Oberlin Inn, and it takes up a lot of space, you can see. And actually it takes up about 2.5 times the amount of space per room key that you want in a good hotel. And my boss and friend of President Keisha's, Marvin Krisloff, is a former attorney. I've been the former chief counsel for the University of Michigan and argued the diversity cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and so forth. And I was giving this presentation to some townspeople, and I said that the old Oberlin Inn was a plausible excuse for limited nuclear war. And Marvin could see lawsuits and all kinds of legal trouble, and he came up to me immediately after and says, don't say that anymore. So I don't. I've dropped that from the repertoire. But what we're trying to do here is to take this block and make this 13-acre block a driver in the local economy, and focus it on the things that assets we already have. There are art, and there are music, and poetry, and culture. And the Oberlin Conservatory of Music is one of the famous conservatories in the United States. So that's the Oberlin Inn. This is what we've replaced it with. This is a 4-year project. It's now virtually complete, excepting the landscaping that Maya Lin, the great artist, will do around the 3 sides of the building. But this is a conference center on this side of the screen. That's the hotel and commercial space here. And then there is a jazz club right here. It's downstairs. This building is powered entirely from an off-site solar array. It will be, when all the paperwork is filed, it will be a LEED Platinum building. And so it's an attractor. And the goal for us was to begin to rethink the downtown economy sustainably. So what did we have to offer? Well, art, poetry, music, and so forth. That's the big part of Oberlin College. But we had no particularly good place. So it wasn't build it and they will come. They were already coming, but they had no good place to stay. So this is a driver in that local economy. It's a buyer of local foods. The impact on the local economy has already been substantial. This is another view of it. The office wing has now been completed almost. It's got another month of work to do, but it's almost done. This will be outdoor dining on the left side of the screen, and Maya Lin's wetland and landscaping will start here and wrap around the building. This is also part of Maya Lin's work. This is done in marbles. This is the Ohio River aquifers. And so it goes under this and it comes up the wall here. And if you happen to be standing under all of those marbles and one falls off and hits you in the head, you get a free drink at the bar. This is part of the use of the space was to be a site of major discussion. So this is the fall event that we held October 6th to 8th, and that seems like a million years ago, doesn't it? Wow. But 6 to 8, the conference title is called After Fossil Fuels, the Next Economy. And so we had 49 speakers and panelists over 3 days. You see Hunter Lovins here, and that's Tom Steyer from California, Michael Duffy from Time Magazine, and Arnold Schwarzenegger. And what was interesting here, this was the week of the 10th anniversary of the California AB 32, the climate bill in California. And Schwarzenegger was very gracious in giving the description of that bill and giving a good bit of the credit to the California legislature and the women in the legislature that drove that process. But we thought about this space as being a kind of place where liberal arts colleges could begin to weigh in on the big issues of the day. I mean, you do that here at Agnes Scott. That's what Bob and I were trying to do back in 72 and 73 and 74. But the idea that this is the time to speak out. And the question is, what do liberal arts colleges have to say about the big issues of the time? So this is roughly what we've done over the course of the first 8 years of the Open Project, which is now about to go into another phase. We're now beginning to dispense with things that we've been doing and integrate that into city government, into college policy, into other organizations, and spin off a for-profit food hub and a housing company. I want to conclude this. I want to come back to the comparison of the early 70s, a very different world with the world we now live in. And a good bit of what we have failed to do, I think we failed to do because the politics weren't up to it. And so I don't think that Donald Trump, and I'm straight into politics, but I don't want to be left or right here. You can be a good conservative and be concerned about the fate of democracy, or a good liberal, same thing. Democracy is simply playing by the rules of the game and agreeing that when there is dissent, we work it out, and the law matters, and rules matter. And so I come to the view in the last few months that we've got to repair a good bit about the democracy before we can really do something finally about climate change. That's got to be fixed first. And it's like a lot of deferred maintenance in a house. The floors are sagging, the windows are broken, the roof leaks, and you're about to have a frat party in a windstorm. And we've got some deferred maintenance to take care of. So I think we're in a different era. And I don't mean this to be partisan in the sense it's Republican or Democrat, but I do want to be partisan about the importance of democracy and the rules by which we live together with all of our differences. And once those rules are suspended, that system doesn't work, and we will be paralyzed to do the kinds of things we have to do to rein in the worst consequences of climatic change. So here we are. That was let me go back to this just a second. That was, I think, the worst day of my 70 plus years now, politically. That was, whether you were a Republican or Democrat, it didn't matter, but that was one of the worst days. This is one of the best. And this demonstrated lots of things. How many of you participated in the march? How many of you? Wow. How many of you will do it again? There we go. Yeah, this is the juxtaposition of the inauguration day and all of the hubbub about the size of the audience, all the conflict around it. And then the next day, when people went out peacefully and demonstrated all over the country and all over the world, that was incredible. This is the march from Air. That's Chicago. But you could go around the world, you can pull together pictures of people going to the streets and saying this is enough, and rights matter, and women matter, and black lives matter, and decency matters, and civility matters. So here's where we are. And this is the moment, and I don't know what more to say, except I think that we have to connect a functioning, vibrant, robust democracy with climate change and our capacity to do what has to be done, preserve a habitable planet for ourselves, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren, as far as you can think. And here are a couple of final thoughts. This worries me. This is poll data, and this is the far column is the United States. This is falling belief that democracy, living in democracy, is important. This has eroded over the years, and for lots of reasons. We can talk about that later, but this is simply hard political science data that in fact we are less attached to democracy and the issues of privacy and rule of law. We know less about it than we ever have before, apparently. And I don't think it works with numbers like this. And then this is part of the reason, I think. And this is I will take my hat off to Donald Trump on one thing. I think he hit on an issue. Elaine and I both grew up near Youngstown, Ohio, in that rust belt from Pittsburgh up to Cleveland. It stretches all the way over to Detroit and up to Flint, Michigan. And so in that area, I think Trump was right. There was neglect. And people thought that you didn't have to pay attention as long as the economy grew and so forth. You didn't have to pay attention to those disenfranchised and those disemployed. And I don't think he had an answer for it. But I don't think Democrats had an answer either. And so as we think about that, the disenchantment with democracy and the decline of the opportunities for young people, and now the opportunity, we're not as mobile a society as we were 40 or 50 years ago. And we're in fact down at the bottom tier, I think this is correct, in the bottom tier of the OECD nations, the developed nations, in terms of people's mobility to move up in the economy. I think these are connected. So I'm going to end with this and just open the floor for conversation. But this is a book that came out, E.F. Schumacher's book that came out shortly after I left Agnes Scott. And I think he had it right. If you go back to the first set of slides, can we make it? And the answer comes back no, then we get despairing and we don't do anything. We don't do the things that we could do that would avoid the worst that might happen. If the answer comes back yes, his argument is we just get complacent, we don't do anything. He said better simply to roll up your sleeves and get down to work where you are with what you have, and get a band together. So that's the debate that we've got to get into. So let me stop here and let's talk a bit. This is a talk which I do want to connect climate and democracy, and the kind of things that we can do. And the little things that we are doing in Oberlin are simply part of that. You're doing those things here. So let's talk a bit. Comments, questions, thoughts?